Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. So today I'm delighted to welcome back Thom Dennis, who is, as special guest, he's also a friend of the show, returning for, I think, the third time, isn't it, Thom? I think now.
It is.
And a personal friend as well. And in fact, Thom, you were my very, very first guest on the show. And I seem to recall you helped me out with some difficulty I was having with the technology around the sound. So, without you, it may not have ever happened. So thank you so much for coming back. Thom is CEO of Serenity in Leadership and author of Rewilding the Corporate Mind, Rediscovering Nature's Blueprint for Leadership in an Age of Disruption and Division. And you can see the book on the shelf behind me if you're watching. If you're listening, you can imagine it behind me. A guide to global leaders and former Royal Marine, Thom transforms how organizations navigate change. He's passionate about translating his book's nature-based leadership principles into immersive in-person workshops, helping individuals and teams remodel themselves and their cultures. His mission is to integrate the best of the masculine and the feminine for sustainable, inclusive leadership transformation. So you haven't set yourself much of a mission there, Thom. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Well, it's always great to be with you, Catherine, so thank you.
Thank you. So would you like to kick off just by saying a little bit of something, because for the people who haven't heard, the other episodes that we've done together, and you haven't tuned into your show, Serenity in Leadership, would you like to say just a little bit about who you are? And then I'm going to come in and start asking you about your book.
All right. Well, thank you. Who am I? It's a good workshop question, that, isn't it? Who are you? So I'm a traveler. I've been in lots of places. I've worked with lots of different people. And I appreciate the land on which I've traveled. Not nearly as much as I should have done, I think, but nevertheless, I think my inner guidance was something that really wanted to experience and begin to commune with the land. And certainly my move to the US in 2009 was all about that, was actually wanting to be in wilderness, which we don't really have in this country. And you could say there's a wee bit in Wales or there's a wee bit in Scotland, but you go to the US and there's rather more of it there, and it feels real. So I've been working for a long time. I started out in an engineering company, actually, and then I went to the College of Air Training and got thrown out because they thought I was too dangerous. And then went into industry, and then got fed up at that and joined the Royal Marines, and spent 17 years there, having all sorts of adventures. Not nearly as exciting as many of my colleagues, I might say, but nevertheless, it was a fabulous time. And I came out at the end of the first Gulf War, when I could see that the way that politicians were sending us into places of danger bore no resemblance to the depth of thinking needed for decisions as grave as that. And we see that today as well. So I became a coach and a consultant, and I've been really working with individuals, groups, and organizations ever since, exploring culture, exploring how people can be better at whatever it is that they're trying to achieve.
Wow. Well, some of that story I wasn't aware of, Thom, and I've known you for a long time. So I love that. And when you said that you're a traveler, I hadn't heard you say that before either. And from what you say, you've been a traveler geographically speaking, but also culturally, different types of culture and different types of organization. And that must have given you some really interesting variety of exposures to different types of cultural and organizational situation.
Absolutely. To be honest, I haven't called myself a traveler before either, but that's what came up. So that's what I said. Yeah, in the Marines, I was all over the place. I was very touched, for instance, when I went up to the Northern Arctic and spent a little time with the Inuit and seeing how they lived and how the government had sort of messed them up. And then I lived in Toronto. I've lived in the States. I've lived in Malta and so on. So and then as a consultant, I've done and worked and led workshops and offsites, really in many countries. And I remember doing an offsite in Kuala Lumpur and having a Chinese Malay person really have a go at me because of my sort of standard Western mindset, which he really resented. And there was good learning there for me. And, more recently I've worked with the Cultural Intelligence Center and trying to get an insight into my strengths and weaknesses in terms of working with cultures that are not representative of my background, let's say, my upbringing.
Yeah. Because you can't suddenly, by a click of your fingers, have a totally grounded experience of what it is to live in one of these other cultures, can you?
That's right. And in some ways you never can. I think some people are more open to the whole idea of a different culture, but you think of the British Empire and what the British exported to, for instance, India, and bureaucracy not least, and how the Indians ran with it and made it their own. In a way that, dealing with Indian bureaucracy, you throw your arms up in horror. But the Brits started that. So yeah, we have a lot of responsibility, and I think of some countrymen that you see abroad, and you think, how crass they are in terms of expecting everybody to understand them, not least the language, and how everybody needs to conform, when actually with a little humility it needs to be the other way around, and we forget that.
You reminded me of, I was in a taxi going from the RFK, I think it is, to Manhattan, to New York. And the chap says to me, what is your accent? And my immediate response in my head was, I don't have an accent. You have an accent. Which is a very British response.
Yes, absolutely. The other British response is, you should know.
Precisely. How can you not already know? And that sort of British caricature of, if they don't understand you, just say it louder and more slowly. And
with irritation.
With mounting irritation and supercilious sort of vibe. Yeah. The blessings and the curse of having a British background and British culture. So tell me a little bit about this book. How did you come to decide to write this book? And what was that moment, because obviously last few times we've spoken, you've said that you're very immersed in the book. You're really working with it. You've really been prepared to do different iterations of it and keep polishing it. You've done an awful lot of work on this. And so there must have been quite a strong commitment at some point to actually do it. What was those early stages of thinking like when you first started considering doing it and kind of grappled with the thought of, shall I actually do it?
I was trying to think the answer, what is the answer to that question? Um, I think that, it's been a gradual gestation. I've wanted to write a book for a long time. My original aim, I think, was to talk about drive. What is drive? Where does it come from? And all of that. But I think my time in the US, particularly, and when I came back from there, yeah, it's gradually formed. I think it's fair to say that. When I was doing constellations, I did a lot of constellation work, organizational, family, and nature constellations. And I think I don't know. I think back to Jill Person, the work that I did with her years and years ago, where we went out into Regent's Park, and one person was blindfolded, and another person was just guiding them, and just the guide would just stop and sort of get the person to lean over and smell a flower, or take the shoes and socks off and feel the grass. It's like we live in and I really got this in Houston, where I lived for a while, this concrete jungle. And we are increasingly detached from the world about us, of which we are a small part. And so sort of all the ideas bubbled up. And I did a darkness retreat for 7 days in Delhi, and that was another piece of going in, and then when you come out, what's the first thing? After 7 days, you really got to be careful with your eyes, and you have to wear sunglasses and all of that. And we came out at night, but you still had to wear sunglasses to protect your eyes and stuff. And then seeing a flower, and again, the scent of things, and the air wasn't very clean, I have to say, in Delhi. It was dreadful, but it's well, all that to say, this has been a gradual development, and a way to integrate what I've learned on the journey, really, and drawing conclusions about the state of leadership today, which in many cases is completely abhorrent. And what is another way? Because we need another way. The world is going into, 2026 is going to be a very difficult year, I think, for many reasons. And if there is a war, a lot of us, most of us, who sort of lived in the comfort since the post-war World War stage, may just get some rude awakenings. And I think of the wars that are going on in the world, and it's like the war's going on all the time, and people are suffering and being killed and tortured and everything else, and we are detached. We're detached from that. We're detached from so much of the system within which we are a part.
Yeah. I understand. Right. So if I can sort of see if I've caught the gist of what you're saying, some of what you're saying, it sounds like your time in the US, where as I gather, you were in an extremely rural location for a period of time, that did something within you that sort of changed something about your perspective And it sounds like since then, you've noticed all sorts of things falling into place from your experience working with organizations, from your history, from what you're observing in the world, and that connection to nature. So it sounds like there's a whole series of things naturally coming together. Is that how it felt to you?
Yeah, kind of. As Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Yes.
One of the things that I really developed and did a lot of work with was horses when I was in the States, and to a lesser degree with dogs, and understanding their, not understanding, getting a sensitivity to the massive sensitivity that they have. It's very humbling, actually. And when you work with a horse, you can't lie to a horse. So if you want to work with one, you've got to be authentic. And I think, I could say I lived a lot of my life not being particularly authentic. Not that I really understood that until sort of later on.
Well, I think many of us can recognize that and can resonate to that. Although, of course, there are degrees of authenticity, aren't there? I suppose there's always another layer that one could open up to. And of course, we're coming into Year of the Horse. Is that something you're connected to? The fact that we're coming into Year of the Horse? And does that have significance for you, given that you mentioned horses?
Well, I'm sure it does. It's something I haven't really explored yet.
Right.
We're still in the snake, and so we're still shedding the skin for a little while longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know that you can talk about these things at all sorts of different levels, but from the Mayans to all the astrologists and frankly the political realists are all seeing massive change coming, and you can't define it. I think, but that's the whole point. Is it's what I keep saying. You can't have the solutions to these problems. All you can do is be better resourced, more resilient, and more flexible to deal with whatever the world delivers. And if leaders can be more like that, then it's going to make life an awful lot easier for the people that they're responsible for.
That's very interesting, the way you just put that. You said, we can't have the solutions for these problems, but it sounds like you're saying we can be better at responding to what comes our way. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yes.
Now, I imagine leaders listening to this might not really be very pleased to hear that.
No, and of course, I think most of the leadership schools around the houses would also, because it undermines their certainty, their this formula will work kind of mindset, which is the way that we've run organizations for 150 years at least. But it ain't like that anymore. And if you look at the organizations that are being more successful, they are very flexible. They're very fleet of foot. They're not clinging to anything. They might have an overall objective, but even that might change given circumstances. And you could say, well, a lot of organizations did that during the pandemic. Some really benefited from being very, very flexible. You don't want to go too far down that road.
No, but I think most people know, there are certain organizations that doubled and tripled in size during that period of time because they were prepared to do what was required to grab the opportunity. And then there are others that were not as fleet of foot, who did not do so well, or who, as you say, were not resourced. They didn't have the resources to respond to. But I think that's a very, very significant and important distinction, the distinction between having the right solution and being resourced and flexible enough to respond to whatever comes. Because, of course, a solution is only the right solution for a given situation, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there's lots of metaphors I could bring to this. In the Royal Marines, we always used to say the first thing that goes out the window is the plan. But the fact is that we, in making the plan, have rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. And each time something goes wrong, you deal with it in some other way. And sometimes when you're rehearsing these things, you deliberately take a layer of leadership out and force people to stand up beyond their normal horizons and see how they do and see what they learn, because that's what rehearsing is about. So, yeah. And I think the more that you can know yourself and know how you are likely to react in a particular way, your beliefs, your values, your limiting beliefs particularly, the more you can look at that one, whatever it is, in the eye and say, thank you, I see you, and now I put you to one side because you're not appropriate right now, the more able you are to respond to whatever comes out.
Yeah, yeah. And in your experience working with clients over the years, have you noticed people as they mature as leaders coming to that similar realization to the one you just stated on their own, over time? Or is it your experience that in order to do that, most leaders actually need to take themselves out of their situation and undergo some sort of dedicated learning experience to do it? I suppose I'm asking, is that something that naturally comes with maturity, or in your observation, is that rare?
I think it can come, and I'm not sure it's that common. I think we're still in a world where there's an awful lot of senior leaders who've not actually made that many mistakes. And the less they have, the more vulnerable they are.
Right.
When something goes wrong. There are some people who, for whatever reason, in their life, they've had their bumps and everything else. But I think I've met leaders who are quite self-aware and they haven't done any training at all. And on the whole, they're pretty damn good leaders. But I think for a lot of people, going to school a bit and sharpening your skills can't do any harm.
Yeah. Well said. Yes, absolutely. Well, I loved your book, Tom. I loved how you wove in your own experience. You speak of in each chapter, you speak about something very, very important, some aspect, and you talk about your own direct experience in relationship to that. But then you also talk about that, how that applies into leadership in a broader sense. So it's quite personal in many ways, the book, whilst also being quite hard hitting in terms of talking about principles and being quite challenging. So what was it like to write that? What was the experience like writing that?
I didn't know how to do it differently. I mean, one of the things that I wrote with some passion was about Antoni Gaudi and the design of the Família Sagrada, this extraordinary cathedral which he started to build, and then he died, and then Franco destroyed all the plans, but yet people have taken on the mantle of being loyal to Gaudi and to complete, and it's nearly finished now. But what an amazing I mean, when I went there and I saw how the ceilings are supported effectively by trees, and he experimented with hanging things upside down. I don't know all the mechanics of it. I mean, I want to go back and look at it again now. But his intuition that nature had all the answers to any challenges that he might come across was so important in terms of us again having this humility to know that we are a part of something amazing, beautiful, extraordinary, and to set ourselves above it is so horrible. And if we can actually sit down and say, okay, what can I learn? What would nature do in a situation like this? You know, when you've got a they showed with the Tokyo Underground, they put some fungus and got it to grow, and the way that fungus grows in that is completely efficient, and it showed the strengths and the weaknesses of the Tokyo Underground system and how it could be improved just by the way the fungus was growing. And it's like, oh my God. I think it's wonderful to be humble in the face of, you know, things that have developed over 3.8 billion years, for goodness sake. We haven't been around, for a moment, a second in that context. And yet we think we know it all, and we really don't.
Mm. A simple idea, but not necessarily an easy one to embody as a leader. Let's say that there's someone watching this or listening to this, or somebody reading your book and exploring these ideas, and they're starting to grapple with this idea of what would nature do. What sort of challenges is that leader going to face within themselves as they contemplate that?
Well, as I said, humility is a good start, and simplicity. And throwing out most of what they've learned about leadership, actually. That most leaders think that they've got to have the answers. Most leaders will die in a ditch over being right. And most leaders actually are very poor communicators. Although if you're in an offsite and you say, hands up all those who think they're good leaders, most people, communicators, they'll put their hand up, and yet they're not.
So they need to reset their self-perception.
Yes. And, it's just asking simple questions like, who needs to know this? I think I've got it right. Who could I check it out with? That's showing vulnerability. It's saying, maybe I don't know. When you've got a really, really horrible problem, and everybody's looking to you, the leader, to have the answer, actually to sit down in a circle and say, right, well, I've got some ideas, but I'd really be open to hearing what you've got. Because we don't. I mean, there's classic things like, how do wolves travel? The leader is the last one in the pack, not the front one. He puts a couple of strong young bucks up front. And then there's all the weak ones in the middle and all of that. There's a structure to it, but it's not classically what you would say, I'm the leader, I've got to be up front. No. Acknowledging, for instance, that in nature, it works in cycles. You've got people now who are working so hard that they don't have time to think. They don't have time to review. And yet, in nature, you have people forget. They will set their New Year's resolutions on the 1st of January, when actually we're just at the beginning of winter, because winter actually starts at the winter solstice. So December, January, into February, that's the winter. That's when you're going back in on yourself. That's when you're resourcing yourself. You're not really exerting yourself too much. And then, and you can see it in plants, they rest, and then they sprout, they flower. They have a cycle. Well, we actually, as human beings, have a cycle. We have many cycles, actually. But the way that organizations are set up, it's growth. Every day it's growth. There's always got to be more. And it's really hardly surprising that people get sick, and they need time out for themselves, and they're not given it unless they take it, which is one of the great strengths, of course, of the working from home movement, which is deeply into recession now, as more and more organizations say, never mind what happened, we want to go back to the way it should be. There's lots of strengths and good things about having everybody back in the office. But still, there were organizations that were getting people back in the office, and they're all sitting at their desks sending each other emails. Which the whole idea was, go home, do that. But when you're in an office, talk to people, walk around. That's where the creativity and the innovation comes from. So, and I suppose another thing around nature is resources. We abuse the resources that we have. We've always got to extract. We're not very good at regenerating, but nature regenerates. Out of every death, there is a rebirth. A tree falls down, it rots, it feeds, and so on. We don't do that, but everything would benefit if we allowed that. It's another cycle, really.
Absolutely. And I suppose as well, this is one of the reasons why I remember somebody, Judy Marshall. You may have met Judy Marshall in Bath years ago.
Right, yes.
She wrote a book called Women Managers Moving On. And this was about women getting to a certain level of seniority in organizations and then reaching a point where they realized they had to leave because they couldn't find a way of actually living in a way that was natural, whilst still being in the organization. The more senior they went, the more they felt they had to sacrifice all of their natural cycles of living. And I'm not even talking about raising children. I'm talking, many of these women had already raised children. So it wasn't about that, but it was about the fact that they just, there seemed no way through other than stay and sacrifice or leave. And organizations were throwing their hands up in horror and saying, why aren't women more ambitious? Why don't we have women on the board? And there was a complete kind of blind spot around it.
Still is. There's in the Russell 3000, there are less women today on boards than there ever have been. And I talk about this in the book, as you know, looking at the masculine and the feminine, and I'm talking about masculine and feminine, not men and women here. But so the feminine traits, which we so need, are not. There's very little space for them in most organizations. They are designed in this case by men, essentially for men, and things haven't changed. So that women who advance typically do have to give up most of their feminine aspects in order to conform to a model which is essentially designed by a dysfunctional masculine.
Yeah.
And that's, well, it's so damaging. It's unbelievable. And we really, really, really need things to change.
So clearly
Yeah.
people can read your book. And I actually think that if someone sat down and read your book all the way through, and in fact, my recommendation is to read a chapter at a time and then take some time to integrate before reading the next chapter, because each one is extreme. I mean, each one on its own actually could be very transformative. You know, I think all this conversation about the masculine and the feminine appears all the way through the book. There are a whole number of themes that appear all the way through the book, and yet each chapter has got a particular window onto it. And I could even see someone using that book as a kind of a masterclass where you study a chapter once a month and explore it and discuss it with colleagues and journal on it and reflect on it, and maybe take it into your peer groups, take it into your, you know, whatever groups you're in, whatever communities you're in, and actually work with it. So it's potent in that sense. And also you were talking about creating workshops and other ways of taking this forward, working with people. So where are you at the moment in relationship to that? Are you still in the final stages of the book, or are you now beginning to move towards working on some of these, what you might call outreach ways of interacting with it?
Yeah, thank you. It's there's a number of things going on concurrently, really. I'm proofreading the final version at the moment, and once that's done, then we'll be able to put it up onto Amazon. So, you know, in the next few weeks, I'm really hoping that's going to happen. I mean, there is a wait list for people who are interested, you know, so they can register their interest. But there's two. Then there's book launches, and I'm going to set up a number of those in around the country. But then there are the workshops, and what I would dearly love is for some organizations to say is honestly different to any of the leadership kind of approaches that are out there. Let's try this. And so the workshop is written, it's ready to roll, and I'm really looking forward to working with some organizations on that. At the same time, we will be setting up some open ones where people can book on and just attend for themselves. There is such a difference between doing a course, which is quite deep, and this will be quite deep, when you're part of a team from an organization. There's great strengths in doing that because they have a common experience, and it's quite risky because you've got to live with each other after you've been on the workshop. So it needs a lot of managing that and follow up and so on, which we can do. It's not a problem, but I think it's I don't really particularly want to compromise by doing less than what this really is calling for. And with the open programs, you know, people can take much bigger risks typically. And I love facilitating those. And I was speaking to somebody who will, I think, be co-facilitating with me. Very different to me and very complimentary. So I'm very excited by that, and really, as soon as we can, we'll get those workshops up and running.
Beautiful. Well, of course, you speak about the risk factor of it, but of course, if these principles that you're talking about are real, then they are by definition benevolent in the sense that they are life enhancing, because nature wants life, right? So, and every single individual that walks into a room to come and participate in one of your workshops, all of this is already alive within them, whether or not they're aware of it. So are you not speaking to something within them that wishes to be invited in anyway?
Yes, you put it beautifully. And I think it's something I really learned over and over again with organizational constellations, is that, family constellations are confusing and difficult, but you're either in a family or you're not. When you have an organizational constellation, then you're bringing everybody's families, whether you like it or not. The dynamics are all there. So it's actually much more complex. But an organizational system, you can leave. So there's all of that that makes these things complex. And therefore, I think I would just say I've worked on this a lot, and I see the strengths and the areas where you've got to be very sensitive, and that gives me, if you like, the confidence to work with these edgy things. But yes, you're right. What everybody will bring their own level of what's my stretch, and hopefully we'll help them get to that place. And of course, in an organization, you'll get somebody who's more willing to be vulnerable. But that's beautiful, because it gives permission in the room for other people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And you sit back and you say, wow, did I say that? Yeah, but I feel good because I did that.
Exactly.
And then you say, right, journal on that. Think about that. What difference does that make? How can you appear differently to your people and actually be more authentic, be more completely yourself? Amazing. People love that. And it's very attractive. People want to follow that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And of course, they don't have to make all of the shifts that might be called for immediately in the one workshop, do they? They are allowed to come back and do the workshop again if they want to.
Definitely.
6 months later, a year later. I've seen some very good results of people redoing workshops either with me or with other people. And they say it's almost like it was a completely different workshop because I was in such a different place when I went along.
And not only that, because the dynamics of the group will be different. You will learn other things as well. That's the beauty of really doing this kind of work. Yes.
Beautiful.
Well, let's do it for the first time first.
Well, exactly. So, Thom, there's never enough time in these conversations to do complete justice to what we're talking about. But before we wind up for today, is there something you'd like to say about this amazing book that you feel it would be a real shame if it doesn't get said in this conversation today, that you'll kick yourself in an hour's time if it's not been said?
I have, written this book, but I do think that in a way, I don't know what level of it, but a great deal of it has come from places within me that I'm not that familiar with. It's just flowed very beautifully in many ways. And I asked Dean Carter, the guy who'd been the head of HR in Patagonia, which is an organization that I deeply respect, if he would be good enough to write a foreword. And he really surprised me by saying yes. And he has written amazing words as a foreword to the book. And a number of other people who've read it, like you, the pre-publication version. And by the way, the end version is quite a bit better than what you've got there. everyone said beautiful things, and they're not just doing it to please me. So it feels like this is important, the messages in this book. And I really encourage people to read it and let it sink in, because the time is now. This world is in such flux that we need people who are grounded in something better than an MBA, you know, or some other business qualification, which is all oriented around money. Money's not going to do it. We need people who are grounded in something much more meaningful. And I'd love people to read this book and see how that sits with them.
Beautiful. Well, who could say no to that? So if somebody wants to put themselves on the wait list, how do they do that?
Well, I thought you might ask me that, and I need to create a shortcut, but you're going to put it in the
show notes.
The what's the names. I think if you Google Rewilding the Corporate Mind Waitlist, you'll get it. But I'll give you a short link.
Yeah.
To it.
Fantastic. And will you also have that on your serenityinleadership.com website?
Yeah.
Great. So that's serenityinleadership.com, which also there's lots of other stuff on there as well, which is interesting about, you know, what you're doing and your background and so forth. So lovely website. Fantastic logo, really sort of balanced, beautiful logo. I love this thing of, you know, the masculine energy and the feminine energy both being valued equally and brought in. And I particularly appreciate that, because I particularly don't appreciate it when people seem to favor one over the other. You know, when people say, let's get rid of all this masculinity, what we need is the feminine. Yeah. Now, hold on a minute. That's a very unfeminine principle thing to say. Exactly. or vice versa. You know, the two, I think we've noticed it's our particular species, Tom. We need the masculine and the feminine. Otherwise, we're not going to be here very long.
Yes.
On a very basic level. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I always ask people this question at the end, which is, we've talked quite a lot about all around various topics to do with the book. Has there been a favorite part of our conversation for you today?
Oh, I loved speaking with you, Catherine. Now you want me to pick a little bit of it.
It's not obligatory.
I don't know. I mean, I think back to what I said about Anthony Gaudi. It's so elemental, that feeling that if I've got a quote from him in the book. I can't remember the actual words now, but it's like the answer to every problem. Look into nature, because they've worked it out first there. He said it more beautifully than that. Anyway, I guess it was translated from Spanish or Catalan, whichever it was that he spoke. So, yeah, that really moves me, that bit.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's a great thing we can all take away from the conversation, whether or not we read the book. You know, if there's a problem, look into nature, because it's already been worked out there. That's a fantastic thing to carry into the week, and just in general in life. That's a fantastic one. I'm personally going to reflect on that one, Tom. Next time I hit something which seems to be a problem, I'll ask myself that question, instead of perhaps thinking, right, well, I've got to solve this now, as if I'm sort of the pinnacle of all resolution of problems.
Yes.
You know, I'm a present day manifestation of an extremely long period of time of things evolving in nature.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Tom. This has been so much fun and lovely to see you. And I'm so excited to hear. Will you let me know when the book is actually up on Amazon? And I will make sure I put the Amazon link in the show notes as well.
You're a star. Thank you very much. I will definitely do that.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, everybody watching and listening. Do go and check out serenityinleadership.com. And also do check the show notes, because there will be a short link in there to go on the waitlist for Rewilding. Let me get the wording right. Rewilding Corporate Leadership. So Tom, thank you very much again for coming. And everyone, check out the other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. Bye.